There's been a big movement over the last 10, 20 years towards getting students with intellectual disabilities specifically access to post-secondary education and higher education learning opportunities.
It's changed significantly since 2008. The Higher Ed Act changed everything. It gave a name to this. It included and prioritized people with intellectual disability for the first time in federal legislation around higher ed. So that was huge. And offering access to financial aid was huge.
Also created some model demonstration programs for students, for college programs for students with intellectual disability. Those are known as, it's a very long name, the Transition and Post-Secondary Programs for Students with Intellectual Disability, or TPSIDs. And at Think College, we are the National Coordinating Center, and we oversee the federally funded TPSID grants. So there are currently 25 federally funded TPSID grants, and those are operated through 47 different programs across the U.S. that are serving students with intellectual disability in accessing higher education. So, as part of those changes to the Higher Ed Act in 2008, as well as movements and advocacy within the field, we're seeing increased access to higher education for students with intellectual disability. Back in 2004, when we first started collecting data on the number of programs, there were 25 programs in the U.S. for this population of students, and that has grown to 268 programs, which is great, but it's still only a very small percentage of all of the post-secondary education institutions that are out there.
That's a really hard supply and demand equation when a student's closest program may be 3 states away.
Students with intellectual disability who traditionally have not been seen as the college-going population are now going to college in greater numbers than ever before, and are just achieving more than anyone could ever have expected.
This is more than just feeling good on a college campus. This is about true, authentic, meaningful, sometimes difficult learning in academic classes. It's about creating opportunities for internships and real paid jobs on campus and off campus. It's about social maturity and social identity, but and creating a credential.
It's about the students and what they get out, and it's also about accountability. So going to college is not free, and it's not cheap in most instances. And so making sure that students get something meaningful at the end means that we have to be accountable to, what are these programs really offering, and is it worth the investment that students and their families are making when they're making this decision to go to college. And that's kind of what we're talking about with the students with intellectual disability. Most of those students are not going to earn a bachelor's degree. Some may earn an associate's degree, but for the most part, we're talking about non-degree credentials, so things like a certificate, a diploma, perhaps an occupational license, or some kind of certification. So, these are the kinds of things that we're focusing on for the students with intellectual disability. And I just think it was great that this report just came out from the data were collected through the U.S. Census Bureau, and they're looking at non-degree credentials. And they actually reported that 27% of the working age U.S. population has a non-degree credential. So I think that's really interesting that there's a fairly significant number of people, like any of us, who have something that's not a degree, but that is a credential that we then use to get a job. And actually most of the people in the report, about 85%, were using that credential for their current job. So it again highlights why a credential is so important once you go out and into the world of work and try to find a job.
We now have data. The other thing this federal funding allowed us to do is capture the information about what students are doing in these programs, the courses they've taken. So we have data on over 2,700 students in 80 some odd universities and colleges. Every course, 20,000 college courses that they've taken, the jobs they've had, both job development and paid employment. And now we're able to look at that data set and say, well, how is this different from the outcomes of all the other students who leave high school? And what we're seeing is the outcomes for students who attend these programs, once they leave the program, the employment rate is about 40%. A year out, it's more like 50 or 60%. The students who leave and go into adult services, their employment rate's at about 15%. So we're not just talking doubling or tripling, we're changing the game. And if you compare those data to the typical enrollment of college kids who have other disabilities or no disability, their employment rate in college is about 40%. So again, just trying to make it look like it does for everybody else is the point. But you're completely right. Outreach, information, knowledge in personal prep programs, the teacher training programs, bringing teachers into events like this where they go, oh, I've never even talked about college with the families that are in my high school. I didn't even know that was a possibility. And it changes the way they approach everything. It's who's at the table, the resources you bring into the planning, the way you approach students' academic access, their soft skills development. Everything changes when you put college on the table because it's a different kind of environment.
It's a matter of what is important to the student and their family in terms of what they want to get out of college. Just like all of us go through a college search process and we look at things that are important to us and we make a decision about where to go, the same thing is happening for students with intellectual disability. You know, that you have to decide what it is that you want to get out of college. We feel very strongly that inclusive academic coursework should be a strong focus of the program. So if you're going to college, the reason that you're there on the campus is to take classes. And so, you know, that's really one of the hallmarks of a quality program, is that the students are taking inclusive academic coursework, either for credit or perhaps for audits, but they are there in the classes alongside the typical college-going students with supports as needed. The Think College standards and quality indicators, which were developed through a long process, lots of expert opinion was given on those to develop the standards, and those really lay out what's important in an inclusive college program. So it's important that the students are there as college students, that they have student IDs, that they're able to register for classes the same way other students are, that they have all the same privileges that other students on the campus do. So, really that they are an integral part of that campus community, and then having that access to the academics. And then it's also really important for students with intellectual disability that we keep employment in mind throughout the program. And so students will often have various work experiences. Paid experiences are great. That's the best thing that you can do for a young person to ensure that they have the best opportunity to be employed after, is to have some paid work experience while they're there in the program. And then also those connections as they're leaving the program. So connecting with employers, making sure you have all the skills to do a job search, and So some things that K-12 can do to help students with intellectual disability prepare for college. First of all, the expectations piece is top of the list. You have to make sure that students understand that they can go to college, that there are opportunities out there, that if they have that desire and the motivation to go and pursue a post-secondary education, it is possible.
Honestly, most of the students that I think you probably see at this conference, who've come to the leadership conference, if they were in high school, they probably never talked to a high school counselor, because typically those students' transition plans are cultivated by a case manager or a transition support professional, but they don't get to go to the college fairs. They don't, when there's college night or they have colleges come visit, often students with intellectual disability aren't even invited to those rooms, nor are their parents. So the disconnect is families and students know what their options are based on the expectations of the professionals at the table from K through 12. And if those professionals have never heard of this, don't believe it can happen, and that, unfortunately, right now is all too often what we'll hear. Oh, you don't know my kids. They'll use some label or some kind of euphemism for somebody who needs significant supports to learn and who may take longer to learn. And they discount the possibility. So I think outreach to guidance professionals, outreach to transition, both special education and general education teachers, the more we can inform them about that this is an option.
And then once students have identified that they have a desire to go to college, the next thing is to make sure that there is planning that happens. So there are choices that are made throughout a student's educational career about which classes they will be in. And as much as possible, keeping students included in general education courses, that's what's going to prepare them for the next step for college. So, when there are choices to be made about, should we push for inclusion, or should we, sometimes a school will offer more of a life skills oriented or a career oriented class, really making sure that focus on inclusion in the general education curriculum and academic coursework is always there, and that there are accommodations and modifications provided so that students can continue their academic growth. And so then as we're going through and students reach their transition age, so students with disabilities will have an IEP, and there's some transition planning requirements as part of that. So once they begin the transition planning process, there will be post-secondary goals that are written as part of the IEP. So the goals should be written in there so that everybody knows the student has set college as their goal after they leave high school. And then, taking steps towards reaching that goal. So like I said, continuing the academic skills, making sure that families and students get information about college, and paying for college as well. So, sometimes, there can be things like a financial aid night that a high school offers, and sometimes the students with intellectual disability or other disabilities are not included in that night because of their perceptions that they won't go to college. But just having that information, inviting those students and their families so that everybody has the information if they decide to make that choice to go to college. So information and resources, doing college visits, going and seeing, perhaps trying it out, perhaps like a summer camp kind of experience that some of these colleges might offer, seeing whether it is something that you want to pursue after leaving high school, and that can be really important. And then really making sure that students develop the skills to advocate for themselves. That's, as before I was at Think College, I co-founded and ran a college program for students with intellectual disability, and really the number one thing that we were looking for in our students was that they had a desire to go to college and that they could express that desire to us, and that it wasn't somebody else pushing them to go to college, but really that they were able, that it was their goal and that they were motivated to be there and to succeed in the college setting. So making sure that students build those skills to advocate for themselves throughout their time in high school is really important.